Hey guys, Altavis Pelzer here, the voice coach, coming to you with another episode of the Speak Easy podcast, where we go behind the scenes talking about what it means to be the successfully paid speaker or author. Guys, this episode is going to definitely be an amazing one for you and you as well. But not just you guys, I want you to make sure that you share it out because there's somebody somewhere that may get something from this episode who's on your timeline. Today's episode is all about starting at the core of your ecology. I'm super excited to have our guest on today. Guess what, guys? You're going to want to take notes on this one. So, hello, Sama. How are you?
Very well, thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
Thank you so much for being a guest on the show today. So, tell them a little bit about yourself, and then we're going to dive into today's topic.
Okay, well, my name is Sama Morningstar, and I have been studying holistic healing and practicing personally holistic healing since, oh my goodness, as long as I can remember, ever since I would sit at my grandmother's feet and massage her feet for her. And I graduated from college at UC Davis with a degree in psychology and women's studies, which made me very curious about how our psychology affects our lives, right? And also our gender. I was very curious about that. And I had studied also ethnic studies in my women's studies courses, and one of my mentors taught us that it was important to look at our own ancestral lineage. And so I did some traveling after college, got in touch with my Mexican heritage, and that was adopted Mexican heritage, and started to see how a lot of the ailments in my psychology and my body had to do with gender and the domination dynamics between masculine and feminine that I'd grown up with. And so this began a lifelong process of healing. I started to recognize a lot of my own body pain and ailments were related to this. And I throughout my life of studying massage therapy, Chinese medicine, nutritional therapy, herbal medicine, and yoga, therapeutic yoga, I started to zero in on the core of my ecology, centering in my womb space. And that became the focus of my healing journey, where we're looking at the origin of our being, where we were developed in our mother's womb, and all of the influences during that time as a blueprint for our lives. And then how do we change that if we have not that great of a blueprint? We keep repeating the same unhealthy patterns, which was my experience. Well, go back to that origin point, to my own womb. And oftentimes, just like in herbal medicine and indigenous healing techniques and wisdom teachings from around the world, the remedy is often right there next to the source of the ailment. Especially in the herbal world, you can often, like poison oak, for example, the plant, you'll find the remedy for poison oak growing right nearby. So for me, that philosophy said, okay, well, if some of my ailments, most of my ailments started while I was in my mother's womb, then the remedy is in my womb. So that's a little bit about me and how I've evolved into the work that I do now.
So it's definitely an interesting take on self-care and holistic healing, simply because that industry in itself has taken on a whole new light within, I want to say, the last 10, maybe even 15 years, with more people being interested in, of course, yoni eggs and essential oils and sage and things of that nature. And so for someone who is just getting to this point of understanding that, okay, there's something more going on than what I see right now. I know you said go back into the ancestry, but for someone who may not have that access, what would be another way that they could go back and at least try to find out some of the things, or who could they talk to?
Well, one thing that I talk to my clients about on the massage table, or that come to me specifically for womb-centered healing, one of the first things is to start to talk to your parents if they're still around, and find out information about what was going on in their lives when you were conceived and when you were born. And because their relationship when you were conceived, the emotional quality, the intimacy level, the health of their relationship when you were conceived sets a blueprint for relational patterns throughout our entire life. It programs our DNA to be a certain way. And so finding out that information, and that might not be super forthcoming if you don't have an open conversational relationship with your parents. But you might be able to find out from an aunt or an uncle who was close to them, or a family friend who was close to them at the time that you were conceived, information about how they related to each other, what was going on. And you can piece it together. Like, I know for myself, I might not get specific stories from my mom, but I know the general circumstances that she was in. She was a single mom. I know that she, from the stories she has told me, I can piece together, my goodness, what would that have felt like, those circumstances? What kind of stress was she under in those circumstances? And it was a lot. And we know that when babies are developing in the womb, those stress hormones are in the amniotic fluid and influencing the development of our DNA, so that from the get-go, we have a blueprint of being stressed out and having a nervous system that's stressed out all the time. And so finding out the specifics about that can help to start us in the right direction. And then finding a hypnotherapist, a somatic oriented therapist, meaning a therapist that focuses on releasing the patterns from our physical body. So there's somatic-oriented psychotherapy, counselors, trauma-informed counselors and therapists, and then therapists that work with the body actually, like with movement, with awareness, meditation practices. So terms to look for in a therapeutic setting would be somatic or trauma-informed therapy settings.
Now that speaks to a lot of those who have become speakers and authors, simply because when we're telling our story, no matter if we're writing it down or if we're telling our story through speech, then, a lot of times it's because of the things that we endured in our childhood. It's the things that we may not have talked about. It's the things that were kind of hidden and buried, that once they came to light, we saw that it not only was a healing process for us, but it also allowed us to be able to help somebody else heal. And that transformation often is not, the easiest of transformation. So I thank you very much for saying, as far as finding a therapist, because I do tell people that sometimes that is part of your process. Just because someone else could write it in a journal and get it out and it was okay for them does not necessarily mean that's going to be the same journey for you. And going to a therapist allows you to go to someone who is who's not biased. They're not biased, because they really like you, or biased because they know your parents, or, anything of the sort. So they can really give you some insight and some words of wisdom and some actionable steps that you can take in order for you to go through that healing process, because we never want to move forward in doing anything for anyone else, and we're still holding on to a lot of those things.
Indeed. In fact, going to somebody with training in somatic healing practices, like, for example, a massage therapist, a hypnotherapist, or a somatic or trauma-informed psychotherapist. They're not only going to be able to support you without bias, they're also going to be able to support you with a wealth of healing practices that your family and friends and partners, social partners don't have. They don't have that training. I mean, therapists go through years of intensive training around the research and practices that we've learned as a species that really helps people overcome these early childhood woundings. And then I would take it even farther to say, that we need to include our womb space and our sexuality in the healing process. It's been excluded from most research and healing processes that many of these types of therapists have been trained in for far too long, and it happens to be the center of our ecology, the origin of our ecology, and the center and our womb space. Doesn't matter what gender you are, we all have a womb space, has the remedy for the ill within it. So it has the power to we have the power to remedy our own imbalances, our own illnesses, our own ailments of any nature, whether it's psychological, emotional, spiritual, or physical. We have that within us, right at the center of the place that's wounded in the first place. And so often, since our wounds started, since our trauma started when we were in our mother's womb, that's why I say womb-centered healing, of finding the answers, finding the healing process within our own womb space, with the support of somebody who reveres and honors that space and includes that space and centers their processes around that space as the center of our ecology, is a really important thing to consider and to bring into our process.
Most definitely. It's, you can't just come out and think that, you're just going to go gung-ho and get on a stage or speak or do any number of things. Even if just starting a business, there's going to be some inner work that has to be done. And I want to speak to that, because one of the things is, a lot of times we tell people that this is some inner work that needs to be done. But what happens on the opposite side of it not being done? So the person that doesn't do this inner work, what do you see happening on a consistent basis in those people?
Well, for one thing that, particularly for women, that often gets in the way of our ability to operate, particularly in business, is the fact that we are cyclical beings. We have menstrual cycles. And people of all gender have cycles like this. There's the seasons of the years, the cycles through the day, and then women have these menstrual cycles that are very powerful. And most business plans and business ways of doing things in business don't recognize or allow for that cyclical nature. And so that becomes problematic, particularly for women, when we have such strong cycles. Now, on top of having this cyclical nature that affects all aspects of our life and our well-being, that's also been neglected in our understanding of our health and well-being. Our menstrual cycle is a vital sign, just as important as your heart rate, your body temperature, all the things that the doctor checks when you go into the office. But it's been neglected in the medical research for a real, since the beginning of Western medicine. And so women are going around with these really out of balance menstrual cycles that are affecting them in really erratic ways, and affecting their psychological well-being, emotional well-being, spiritual well-being, and physical well-being, and mental well-being on all levels, and not getting any medical support, not getting any psychological support. Everybody just doesn't even want to deal with the menstrual cycle. And yet it can be affecting us tremendously, where some days we just don't even want to get out of bed. Other days we have all this energy and don't know how to focus it. And without honoring that and allowing for that kind of cyclical nature and planning our businesses around it, it can get really out of balance and really very wonky. And that's true for our lives as well. And then on top of that, if we're trying to become entrepreneurs and run our own business, it gets even more intense, that it's not, if it's not in alignment. And so, that can create all kinds of mental health issues and all of that. And so getting in tune with our cyclical nature and giving ourselves permission to attend to that and have a rhythmic, cyclical lifestyle and plan things in our life and our businesses. And that's the beauty of becoming an entrepreneur, is that we have the power to schedule things around and be our own boss, if you will, and schedule things around our cyclical nature, so that we know, once we learn about it, that there's certain times of the month when we can get a gazillion and one things done and act like nothing happened, and be as happy as a clam and full of energy still in the evening, and have, make dinner and do everything on top of it. Other times of the month, we need to be doing absolutely nothing, so we can plan our business to be in sync with that. And that creates a much more streamlined and effective way of going about what we're doing.
I love that. And it makes me think about when the Obamas were in office, and an article came out about how there was no sanitary napkins and tampons in the West Wing. And that just completely took me off guard, because of how many women we have, I'm sure, that are in the West Wing doing one thing or another as a part of whatever position they hold in the government. Why is that something that we would not have? I think if you have a gourmet chef, why don't we have the things that the women who are there would need? That really took me aback. And it even now, just saying it out loud, it still sounds like, could we really still be in this medieval time of not understanding the woman's body and how it definitely affects every aspect of her life?
Not only her life, but the life of everyone around her. Suppressing this central life-affirming, life-creating part of humanity, suppressing it and ignoring it, sweeping it under the rug and pretending it doesn't exist, that doesn't make any sense. And yet we're doing it systematically across the board as a society, in all countries, everywhere, except some indigenous cultures that still have some ancient traditions intact. But still, they're often laced with sort of a patriarchal dominant viewpoint over the top of it. And you have to kind of, resurrect the feminine honoring, feminine revering aspects of the traditions. And so we've just been doing this for so long that we just take it for granted that, you don't pay attention to that, when it's what brought us all here in the first place. And so I'm surprised that we're surviving at all as a species, when we're so severely suppressing and ignoring and mistreating and abusing the very thing that birthed us all and gave us all our physical forms.
Most definitely. Now, whenever I have someone on as a guest, I always ask this question: in your journey so far, have you had any blunders, any moments where you can go and look back and say, you know what? Okay, that wasn't the best option or the best idea at that moment. Even though, we may learn from it, but being able to look back and say, yeah, that one wasn't a good idea.
Well, I've had many and learned from each one. So it's hard for me to say that I always like to say it seemed like a good idea at the time. because it's
I can agree with that statement.
usually then it's later on we realize, oh, why didn't I see that? And the things that come to mind, especially in my entrepreneurial journey, that might be relevant to the listeners here, is that I've had to actually fire several business coaches that I was totally into when I first started working with them. And it was a great idea when I first started working with them. And they seemed to have everything I needed or wanted. But the more I learned and went through the process of trying to implement what they were teaching me, the more it became clear that their methods and what they were trying to teach me and how they were trying to teach it to me didn't fit what I was doing and wasn't truly aligned. So I had to speak up about it. And that can often be quite awkward. Now I'm not saying that I would go back and change anything, because I learned a whole lot about it. And it was a good idea. I did learn a whole lot. But then I also got to the point where I had to step up and say, you know what? I'm going in this direction. This is what's important to me, and it's obviously not important to you. So that means that we're parting ways. And that is an uncomfortable process. And I don't know that there's any way to avoid that. And so I just want to encourage people when you get to that point, even if you think maybe you should have seen that earlier, you should have known it, there were signs maybe that you didn't listen to from the get-go, and maybe you should have known it, to just have compassion for yourself, that in our enthusiasm, our excitement for learning new things, we might overlook or not attend to things, and then they become really important at a certain point. And then we have to say, okay, I'm moving on now. So just having compassion for myself has been really important along that process.
And that has been, I think, a lesson that I learned the hard way myself. Mm-hmm. Because I think coming into it, especially with the big boom that there was in coaching, coming into it, you know, everybody was like, they had $1 million strategies and six-figure strategies and billionaire strategies. And you were just like, okay, well, one of you guys can help me. Somebody somewhere can help me with all of these amazing strategies. And we missed out on, there being, the strategy was great, but was it going to fit for me? Was it going to fit for my clientele? Was it going to fit for the business model that I was putting together? And a lot of us went into coaching not really having a clear understanding of, is this really for me? Or am I just connecting to it because of what they said they could do, not necessarily what they can do for me?
Yeah. And one of the biggest things that became really clear to me as something to look at and notice when I was looking for support for my business process and my growth in that arena was, I have a degree in psychology. And a lot of what I studied in psychology was about how psychological research was being used to create more successful marketing strategies, which means that most marketing strategies are based on psychological manipulation. So creating a false sense of scarcity, for example. It happens all the time. Buy now or the price is going to go up. Right? That's a false sense of scarcity. Do it now or you're going to miss out. Okay? That's a totally artificially imposed sense of scarcity. That's a psychological manipulation tactic. Okay? Now, it's one thing if you have a natural evolution of your pricing, that your pricing needs to go up for other reasons, but most people use price hikes to manipulate people to purchase the lower price product in droves right now before the price goes up. or a lot of people use that. And there's a whole long list of psychological, I mean, I've sat in various, free initial webinars. This is our program for making you six figures and and they sit there and list all of these psychological manipulation tactics that you're going to train you how to do. And as a holistic health practitioner, it's completely unethical for me to be doing anything like that at all in my marketing programs. And so that became more and more painfully clear that most of the business models that business coaches would be offering me would be unethical for me to implement.
Oh my goodness, this has been an amazing episode, and we're ending it on such an amazing note, because I do feel as though that is a topic that many people have not discussed. And like I said, because it was such a big boom in coaching, in online coaching, that people did not have a clear understanding of what we were getting into. And that was, oh my goodness, that FOMO, fear of missing out, and the fact that many people were playing on that, but not necessarily saying, if this was going to work for me, or getting you into a program and then manipulating you into doing what they wanted to do, what was going to be best and look the best for their brand, as opposed to what was going to be best for you. And so I know many, many, many people that unfortunately started out, doing a business and ended up quitting because of that very thing.
And this is a symptom of our overall economic structure that I feel is very much related to the work that I do, the womb-centered healing work. And that is the economic structure that devalues, does not value caring for each other and taking care of each other. So if you look at all the unpaid labor or low paid labor that goes on, for example, childcare workers, they're not expected to have a whole lot of training. They're paid the minimum amount that people can get away with. And they're raising our children. And, we're not investing in that, right? Mothers, home housewives are expected to work tremendously long hours for no pay and no monetary value. So caring for the elderly and all these things where we're caring for each other is completely undervalued and not worked into our economics. And so a marketing strategy marketing to make money, and our economics of marketing and business isn't including an intrinsic caring for each other that really needs to begin to include to alleviate some of these ailments that we're suffering from in the business world.
Absolutely love it. So anyone who may be interested in connecting with you, let them know where they can find you at, how they can connect.
You can find me on my website at wombcenteredhealing.com. And just send me an email, check out my offerings there. I look forward to hearing from you.
Most definitely. Guys, this is why we have these discussions, because there are so many different aspects and angles when it comes to being the successful, oh my goodness, speaker, the successful entrepreneur, the successful author, the successful chef, the successful any part of what it is that you are attempting to be successful at. There are so many different elements to consider when moving in the direction of that success. That's why it's best to have someone that you can talk to. It's best to make sure that you're signing on when it comes to coaching to someone who is really there for your best interest and not there just for a check. I think we've actually gotten to a point where it's time out for those who are just there for a check, which is why a lot of people are coming off of jobs and are frustrated with jobs. So take a look at that within your journey and see if it's time for you to take, that step towards someone who is going to be a little more empathetic to who you are as an individual and see you as an individual, not just a number. Guys, don't forget that if you ever have questions, by all means, reach out to us over in the free community over on Facebook, hashtag World Voice League, or you can go to bit.ly/World Voice Community. Come in, ask questions. We would love to discuss how we can take this to a whole nother level for you, as well as we would love to know how this particular episode resonated with you. Go over to bit.ly/Speakeasy Podcast Show and leave us a review, letting us know how this episode resonated with you. Or if you had more questions, you can leave them there as well. Guys, I'm happy to be able to bring you these episodes and even more. So be on the lookout. And until next time, guys, don't forget to press it out. See ya.